I stood alone at my daughter's funeral, watching her tiny white casket sink into the earth, while my parents raised champagne glasses at my brother's pool party. The pain of losing my 6-month-old to SIDS was unbearable, but their betrayal cut deeper. Have you ever been abandoned by the ones who should love you most? Felt invisible in your darkest hour? This isn't just my story, it's a reckoning. A tale of grief, betrayal, and standing up for what matters. Stay with me because this journey through pain to strength might just change how you see loyalty. My name is Natalie, a 29-year-old pediatric nurse from Seattle. 6 months ago, my world shattered when my daughter, Lily, died suddenly from SIDS at just 6 months old. Her tiny hands, her gummy smile, gone in an instant. But what broke me more was my parents' choice to skip her funeral for my brother's engagement party. They called her just a baby, as if her life, her death, didn't matter. This story isn't only about loss. It's about facing a family that chose a pool party over my grief. It's about finding my voice, confronting their cruelty, and rebuilding a life to honor Lily. I made them face the weight of their actions, not with anger, but with truth. This is a story of pain, yes, but also of resilience, of standing tall when the people you love let you down. If you've ever felt unseen, this is for you. Growing up, I was always second to my brother, Ethan, the golden child in my parents' eyes. His basketball games got fireworks. My straight A's got a shrug. That pattern of neglect followed me into adulthood, culminating in the ultimate betrayal when they dismissed my daughter's death. This story might hit close to home if you've faced loss or family indifference. Maybe you've stood alone in your pain, wondering why those closest to you didn't show up. I've been there, and I want you to know you're not alone. This video will take you through my darkest days. Losing Lily, facing my parents' callousness, and finding strength to hold them accountable. It's raw, it's real, and it's about finding light in the shadows. I'm sharing this to honor Lily and to connect with others who felt betrayed in their grief. So please hit that like button if this resonates. Subscribe to join me on this journey. Share where you're watching from in the comments. Your city, your story. Have you faced loss or betrayal? Your experiences could help someone else feel seen. And if you can, support organizations like First Candle, helping families navigate infant loss. Let's build a community where no one grieves alone. Stick with me. Lily's story deserves to be heard. I grew up in a tidy colonial house in Portland, Oregon, where the grass was always trimmed, and the flowers bloomed on cue. But inside those walls, my world was shaped by a truth I couldn't escape. My brother, Ethan, was the sun, and I was a shadow trailing behind. Ethan's 32 now, 3 years older than me, but back then, he was the golden child, the center of my parents' universe. Susan and Robert, my mom and dad, 58 and 60, built their lives around him. Their pride as visible as the banners they hung for his every milestone. When Ethan made the high school basketball team at 16, they threw a backyard barbecue that could have rivaled a wedding. Relatives flew in, neighbors crowded our lawn, and fireworks lit up the night sky. I remember standing at the edge of the yard, 13 years old, clutching a soda, watching everyone orbit around Ethan's triumph. That same year, I got accepted into the honors program at school, a big deal for a kid who stayed up late studying, hoping for a nod of approval. My parents' response: "That's nice, Natalie," before turning to Ethan to ask about his next game. It wasn't just one moment. It was every moment. Ethan's birthdays were extravaganzas, with custom cakes and rented venues. Mine were afterthoughts, a store-bought card if I was lucky, often handed over with a distracted, "Happy birthday, sweetheart." When Ethan scored a B on a math test, Mom framed it as proof of his well-rounded nature. My straight A's. They were expected, unremarkable, like breathing. I learned early that my achievements didn't carry the same weight. Ethan's soccer trophies lined the mantel. My academic awards gathered dust in my room. By the time I was in high school, I'd stopped expecting their attention. I focused on my studies, my friends, anything to carve out a space where I felt seen. But the hierarchy was clear. Ethan was the star, and I was the supporting act, always waiting in the wings. My parents weren't cruel in the obvious ways. No yelling, no harsh punishments. Their neglect was quieter, a slow drip of dismissal that eroded my sense of worth. They'd show up to Ethan's games with banners, but my debate team finals. They were too busy. When I won a scholarship at 17, they nodded and said, "Good job," before planning Ethan's graduation party. It was as if my life was a footnote in their story, one they rarely bothered to read. Looking back, I see how they shaped us. Ethan, basking in their adoration, never questioned his place. Me. I learned to survive on scraps, building a resilience I didn't yet understand. But those years planted a seed of doubt that would grow into something much heavier later, when the stakes were higher than I could have imagined. By the time I reached college, I'd accepted my role as the invisible daughter. I threw myself into my studies at the University of Washington, determined to build a life where I wasn't defined by my parents' indifference. But the pattern of neglect followed me, a shadow I couldn't outrun. When Ethan graduated college with a marketing degree and AC average, my parents threw a lavish party at a downtown Portland hotel. They flew in aunts and uncles, toasted his bright future. My graduation from nursing school with honors was marked by a brief dinner, cut short because Ethan had a date that night. "You'll understand, Natalie," Mom said, as if my moment was less urgent. Money told the same story. When Ethan wanted a luxury condo at 25, my parents handed over a hefty down payment, no questions asked. "He's building a life," they said. Meanwhile, I was drowning in student loans, working night shifts at a hospital to pay them off. When I asked for help, Mom's response was, "You and David are practical people. Ethan has a more expensive lifestyle." Practical. That word stung, a polite way of saying my dreams didn't matter. I swallowed it like I swallowed so many slights, telling myself I didn't need their validation. But deep down I did. I wanted them to see me just once the way they saw Ethan. Every milestone I hit was overshadowed. My first published article in a nursing journal. They didn't read it. Ethan's promotion to junior manager. They called every relative to brag. My engagement to David. A quick, "That's nice," followed by a discussion about Ethan's latest girlfriend. I started to feel like a ghost in my own family, present but unseen, my voice drowned out by Ethan's endless spotlight. I built walls, focusing on my career, my friends, my own small victories. But each dismissal added weight to that seed of doubt planted in childhood, whispering that I wasn't enough. I tried to bridge the gap, inviting them to my life's moments. My first apartment, my hospital's charity gala. They'd show up late, if at all, always with an excuse tied to Ethan's schedule. Ethan's work dinner ran long, or Ethan needed us to help with his car. I stopped inviting them, but the hurt lingered, a quiet ache I carried into adulthood. I told myself it didn't matter, that I was stronger than their neglect. But strength doesn't erase longing. I still hoped, foolishly, that one day they'd choose me, that they'd see my worth. That hope would shatter in the worst way possible, when I needed them most, and they turned their backs not just on me, but on my daughter. Looking back, I see how those years of being second best shaped every piece of me. I became fiercely independent, a trait I'm proud of now, but it came at a cost. Every ignored milestone, every forgotten birthday, every time my parents chose Ethan's needs over mine, it carved a wound I didn't acknowledge until it was too late. I learned to survive on my own, to find validation in my work, my friendships, my own quiet resilience. But deep down, I was still that 13-year-old girl at the edge of the barbecue, clutching a soda, waiting for someone to notice me. I craved their approval, their love, even as I told myself I didn't. Those wounds built a kind of armor, but they also left cracks. I second-guessed my worth, wondering if I was too demanding, too sensitive, too invisible. When I aced my exams or landed my first nursing job, I'd imagine my parents' faces lighting up like they did for Ethan. They never did. Each slight was a reminder, "You're not enough." I pushed forward, building a life I was proud of, but that doubt lingered, a shadow that grew heavier with time. By the time I was 29, I thought I'd made peace with it. I had David, my career, a home we'd built together. But the truth was, I was still carrying those childhood hurts, waiting for a moment to prove I mattered. When Lily came, I thought she might change things. I dreamed they'd see her, love her, and through her, see me. But their indifference to her, those brief visits, those thumbs-up emojis, echoed the same dismissal I'd known my whole life. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about my daughter, and that hurt cut deeper. Their absence in her life foreshadowed the ultimate betrayal, one I couldn't have predicted. Standing at her funeral, alone, while they celebrated Ethan's engagement, I realized those cracks from childhood had become a chasm. That realization was both devastating and liberating. It forced me to face the truth. My parents' neglect wasn't my fault. It wasn't about me being less than Ethan. It was about their inability to see beyond him. That understanding gave me the strength to confront them later, to demand they face their choices. But in those early years, it was just pain, a slow bleed of feeling unseen, unloved, unworthy. I carried that weight into motherhood, into loss, and it made their betrayal at Lily's funeral not just a single act, but the culmination of a lifetime of disregard. Yet from that pain I found a resolve I didn't know I had. A resolve to stand up, not just for me, but for Lily, to ensure her memory would never be dismissed like I was. When I stepped onto the University of Washington campus at 19, I was carrying the weight of a childhood spent in my brother's shadow. I thought I'd always be invisible, but then I met David. He was 20, an architectural engineering student with a quiet confidence and a smile that felt like home. We met in a study group, bonding over late-night coffee and shared notes. David saw me, not as Ethan's sister, not as the overlooked daughter, but as Natalie, someone with dreams, fears, and a heart worth knowing. His kindness was disarming, like sunlight breaking through a storm. David's family was a revelation. His parents, Linda and Paul, welcomed me into their Seattle home with warmth I'd never known. They asked about my day, remembered my favorite foods, and celebrated my small victories, like when I passed my first anatomy exam with flying colors. Felt like a movie, this idea of a family that showed up, that cared without conditions. I'd sit at their dinner table, listening to their laughter, and wonder why my own parents couldn't be like that. Linda would hug me goodbye, and Paul would slip me a coffee gift card saying, "For those long study nights." It was love, plain and simple, and it felt foreign. 3 years ago, at 26, David and I got married in a small ceremony by Lake Washington. My parents attended, but their presence was perfunctory. Mom checked her phone. Dad left early for a golf game with Ethan. David's parents, though, were there with tears and toasts, their joy filling the gaps my family left. We bought a modest house in Seattle, 40 minutes from my parents' Portland home. That distance was deliberate. I needed space from their indifference, a place where David and I could build something real. Our home was small, but it was ours, filled with dreams of a future I thought could finally be mine. David became my anchor. He'd listen when I vented about my parents, never pushing me to confront them but always reminding me I was enough. "You're my home, Natalie," he'd say, and I'd believe him. For the first time I felt seen, not as a shadow but as a whole person. That love gave me the courage to imagine a life beyond my family's neglect, a life where I could be the center of someone's world. But even as I built that life, a part of me still hoped my parents would one day see me the way David did. That hope, fragile as it was, kept me tethered to them, even as I tried to let go. When David and I found out we were pregnant, it was like the world bloomed in color. I was 27, nervous but thrilled. imagining a tiny person who'd carry pieces of us both. David's parents were over the moon. Linda started knitting baby blankets. Paul sent us articles on crib safety. They planned a baby shower before we even asked, calling to discuss nursery colors and offering to paint. Their excitement was a warm embrace, a reminder that our child would be loved fiercely. My parents' response was a cold splash of reality. "That's nice," Mom said over the phone. "Did Ethan tell you he's up for a promotion at his firm?" The baby shower, hosted by Linda, was a day of laughter and love. Pastel balloons, a cake shaped like a teddy bear. My parents showed up, but they spent the whole time talking about Ethan's recent Bahamas vacation. I watched them from across the room, holding a gift of tiny onesies, and felt that familiar ache. I wanted them to care, to see this moment as big as I did. But they didn't. They left early, citing a dinner with Ethan's colleagues. I smiled through it, but inside I was shrinking. Lily was born on a snowy January morning in 2024, at a Seattle hospital where I'd later work my shifts as a nurse. She came into the world at 6:32 a.m., with David's dark curls and my green eyes. Holding her, I felt a love so intense it hurt, like my heart had grown too big for my chest. She was perfect, her tiny fingers curling around mine, her soft coos filling the quiet. David wept, kissing her forehead, whispering, "You're our miracle." Linda and Paul arrived within hours, their faces wet with tears, arms full of gifts, a stuffed bunny, a photo album already started. They stayed all day, taking turns holding Lily, their joy a blanket around us. That moment, cradling Lily, I felt whole. I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd be the bridge to my parents, the one thing that could make them see me. I imagined them holding her, their hearts softening. But even as I dreamed, a part of me knew better. Their indifference had deep roots, and Lily, as perfect as she was, might not be enough to change them. Still, I held on to that hope, clinging to the idea that my daughter could rewrite the story I'd lived my whole life. Over Lily's 6 months, David's parents became her biggest fans. They visited weekly, sometimes just to give us a break so we could nap or have a quiet dinner. Linda would snap 1,000 photos. Lily's first smile, her first time rolling over, her giggle at Paul's silly faces. They made a scrapbook, each page a love letter to their granddaughter. Their presence was a gift, a reminder that Lily was surrounded by people who saw her light. My parents, though, were a different story. They visited exactly twice. The first time, 3 weeks after Lily's birth, was because Mom's book club friend insisted on seeing the baby. They stayed 45 minutes, holding Lily like she was a fragile ornament, their faces stiff. When she started to fuss, they handed her back, relieved. The second visit was a pit stop on their way to Ethan's work dinner. They barely looked at her, their minds already elsewhere. I sent them weekly updates, photos of Lily's milestones, videos of her laughing. I wanted them to know her, to love her. Mom would reply with a thumbs-up emoji, if she replied at all. Dad never did. Each unanswered message was a small cut, but I kept sending them, hoping one day they'd respond with more than silence. I'd lie awake at night, staring at Lily's sleeping face, wondering why my parents couldn't see what I saw. A miracle, a life that deserved their awe. Their indifference wasn't new, but it hurt more now because it wasn't just about me. It was about my daughter, and she deserved better. Looking back, I see how naive I was, thinking Lily could change them. I'd spent my life chasing their approval, and I thought motherhood might finally earn it. But their neglect of Lily was a mirror of their neglect of me, a pattern so ingrained it felt like fate. I'd watch Linda cradle Lily, her eyes shining with love, and feel a pang of envy, not for Lily but for myself. Why couldn't my mom be like that? Why couldn't she show up, not just for photos, but for the messy, beautiful reality of being a grandparent? I started to grieve that fantasy, the one where my parents transformed into the family I'd always wanted. That grief mixed with a growing anger. Every time I sent a photo and got a thumbs up or nothing, It felt like they were dismissing not just me, but Lily's existence. I'd hold her close, whispering promises to be the mother I never had, to see her, to choose her every day. But the weight of my parents' absence was heavy. I began to see their neglect as a choice, not an accident, a choice that would hurt even more when Lily was taken from me. That realization was a quiet fire, one that would fuel my resolve later, when their betrayal reached its peak. I didn't know it then, but those months of hoping, of reaching out to them, were building a strength I'd need to face the unimaginable. Lily, in her short life, was teaching me not just love, but the courage to demand it for both of us. It was a Tuesday in July 2024, one of those warm Seattle evenings where the air felt soft, and life seemed to hum with possibility. Lily, my 6-month-old daughter, had been her usual radiant self that day. She'd had a slight cold the week before, a runny nose, a little fussiness, but her pediatrician assured me it was just a minor virus, nothing to worry about. By that weekend, she was back to her gummy smiles, her dark curls bouncing as she giggled at David's silly faces. She'd clutch her favorite stuffed bunny, its floppy ears worn from her tiny hands, and babble like she was telling us the secrets of the universe. I remember watching her, my heart swelling with a love so fierce it almost hurt to feel it. That evening we followed our usual routine. David and I gave Lily her bath, her little legs kicking in the warm water, her eyes bright with delight. I sang her a lullaby, the same one I'd sung every night since she was born, my voice soft as she nestled against me. We fed her a bottle at 8 p.m., her eyelids fluttering as she drank, her tiny fingers curled around my thumb. David kissed her forehead, whispering, "Sleep tight, sweet girl." We laid her in her crib, in that soft blue nursery we'd painted with cloud decals, a room that felt like a sanctuary. The crib was bare, just as the SIDS guidelines recommended. No blankets, no pillows, only Lily and her bunny. We checked the room temperature, made sure the monitor was on, and closed the door with a quiet click. Downstairs, David and I curled up on the couch, sharing a bowl of popcorn and watching an episode of our favorite show. It was one of those rare, peaceful moments, new parents stealing a sliver of normalcy. We laughed at a dumb joke, talked about our plans for the weekend, and went to bed around 11 p.m. The baby monitor sat on my nightstand, its green light steady, its silence a comfort. Lily usually woke around 5 a.m. for a feeding, her soft coos crackling through the speaker. That night, though, the monitor stayed quiet. Too quiet. I didn't realize it then, but that silence was the beginning of the end. As I drifted to sleep, I felt a flicker of unease, like a whisper I couldn't quite hear. I brushed it off, exhausted from a long shift at the hospital. Lily was fine, I told myself. She'd been perfect all day, eating well, playing, smiling. We'd done everything right. Back sleeping, no loose bedding, a cool room. We'd read every article, followed every guideline. SIDS was a shadow in the back of my mind, but it felt distant, like something that happened to other people. I didn't know that night would shatter my world, that the love I'd poured into Lily would soon become a grief too heavy to bear. Looking back, I cling to those last moments, her giggle, her warmth, the way her eyes locked onto mine as if she knew me better than I knew myself. That night felt ordinary, but it was the last ordinary night I'd ever have. I didn't know I was hours away from a loss that would redefine me, a loss that would expose the fault lines in my family, pushing me to a reckoning I never saw coming. Lily's light was still with us, but it was about to go out, and nothing, not my love, not my vigilance, could stop it. I woke at 6 a.m. from my early shift at the hospital, the gray light of dawn creeping through the curtains. Something felt wrong, like the air itself was holding its breath. Lily hadn't stirred at 5, which was unusual. She was always up by then, her soft cries pulling me from sleep. I lay there for a moment, staring at the monitor's green light, waiting for her coo, her rustle, anything. Silence. My heart started to race, a cold dread settling in my chest. I told myself she was just sleeping deeply, that she was fine. But my body moved before my mind caught up, pulling me out of bed and down the hall to her nursery. The door creaked as I opened it, and the soft blue walls greeted me, the cloud decals glowing faintly in the morning light. Lily's crib stood in the center, surrounded by the stuffed animals David's parents had given her. I whispered her name, Lily, as I leaned over the crib. She was still, too still, her tiny body curled in the same position we'd left her in. I touched her cheek, expecting warmth, expecting her to stir. It was cold. It's cold. A scream tore out of me before I knew it was mine, raw and jagged, splitting the quiet. David bolted down the hall, his footsteps pounding. Natalie, what's wrong? He saw my face, saw Lily, and his eyes widened in panic. He pushed past me, his hands trembling as he scooped her up, her little head limp against his chest. Lily, wake up, he whispered, starting CPR. His movements desperate but precise. I stood frozen, my mind refusing to process what my eyes were seeing. My daughter, my light, wasn't moving. Her dark curls framed a face too pale, too still. I fumbled for my phone, dialing 911, my voice shaking so badly the dispatcher had to ask me to repeat myself. My baby, she's not breathing. Please hurry. The minutes that followed were a blur, a nightmare I couldn't wake from. David kept up CPR, his face contorted with fear, whispering, "Come on, Lily, come on." I stood there, useless, my hands pressed against my mouth, trying to hold back the sobs that felt like they'd tear me apart. The paramedics arrived, their boots heavy on our hardwood floors, their voices calm but urgent. They took over, working on Lily with a focus that felt both hopeful and futile. I clung to David's arm, my nails digging into his skin, praying for a miracle, for her to gasp, to cry, to live. But her tiny body stayed still, her chest unmoving under their hands. In that moment, time stopped. The nursery, once a place of joy, felt like a tomb. I kept thinking, this can't be real. We'd done everything right. We'd followed every rule. But SIDS doesn't care about rules. It doesn't care about love or dreams or the life you planned. Takes and it leaves you empty. I looked at David, his face gray, his eyes pleading with the paramedics. I wanted to scream, to bargain, to trade my life for hers. But all I could do was stand there, watching the world I'd built collapse around me. The ambulance ride was a haze of sirens and sterile light. I sat in the back, holding Lily's tiny hand, her fingers cold against mine. David was beside me, his face buried in his hands, his shoulders shaking. The paramedics worked silently, their faces grim, but they didn't stop trying. I kept whispering to Lily, "You're okay, baby. Mommy's here." But the words felt hollow, like they were floating away into the void. At the hospital, they rushed her into the ER, and we followed, clinging to each other, our footsteps echoing in the sterile halls. A doctor with kind eyes met us in a quiet room, her voice gentle but heavy. "I'm so sorry," she said. "Your daughter passed away. It's likely sudden infant death syndrome." The words hit like a physical blow, stealing my breath. David collapsed against the wall, a sob breaking free. I stood frozen, my mind refusing to accept it. Lily was gone. My perfect girl with her dark curls and green eyes was gone. We asked to hold her one last time. They brought her to us, wrapped in a soft blanket, her face peaceful but wrong, so wrong. I traced her cheeks, her tiny nose, memorizing every detail, knowing I'd never hold her again. The grief was a weight, crushing my chest, making it hard to breathe. We'd done everything right. Back sleeping, no blankets, the perfect room temperature. I'd read every book, followed every guideline. Yet here we were, in a sterile hospital room, saying goodbye to our daughter. I kept replaying the night before, her giggle, her warmth, searching for a sign I'd missed, something I could have done. But there was nothing. SIDS doesn't leave clues. It just takes, and it leaves you with questions that have no answers. That room felt like a void, a place where time didn't exist. David and I held each other, our tears mixing as we kissed Lily's forehead, her hands, her tiny feet. The hospital chaplain came, offering words I barely heard. A grief counselor spoke about next steps, but it was noise, meaningless against the roar of my loss. Kept thinking, how do I go on? How do I live in a world without her? The silence where her laughter should have been was deafening, a hole I couldn't climb out of. Looking back, I see that moment as the breaking point, not just of my heart, but of the illusions I'd held about my family. I'd hoped Lily would be the bridge to my parents, that her light would pull them close. But as I sat in that hospital room, their absence loomed large. I called my mom, my voice barely a whisper. "Lily died," I said. Her response, a flat, "That's terrible," was a preview of the betrayal to come. David's parents were already on their way, dropping everything to hold us. My parents didn't ask how we were, didn't offer to come. That indifference, that coldness, was a wound on top of a wound, one that would fuel my resolve to make them face what they'd done. Lily's loss was the end of one chapter, but it was the beginning of another, a fight to honor her, to demand that her life and my pain mattered. The moment I heard those words, "I'm so sorry. Your daughter passed away," my world stopped turning. Lily, my 6-month-old daughter, was gone, taken by sudden infant death syndrome in the quiet of her nursery. The hospital room felt like a vacuum, swallowing every sound except the echo of my own heartbeat. David, my husband, was crumpled against the wall, his sobs a raw, guttural sound I'd never heard before. I stood there, frozen, clutching Lily's tiny, cold hand, trying to memorize her face, knowing it was the last time I'd see her. My mind screamed, "This can't be real," but the weight in my chest told me it was. I don't remember how I found my phone, or how my trembling fingers dialed my mom's number. Susan, my mother, 58, had always been distant, but she was still my mom. I needed her, needed my parents to hold me together when I was falling apart. "Mom," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "Lily died last night." "Edith, we're at the hospital." There was a pause, a silence that stretched too long, like she was processing a minor inconvenience. Then, "Oh, Natalie, that's terrible. Let us know the funeral details." No gasp, no tears, no promise to rush to my side. Just a flat acknowledgement, as if I'd told her I'd lost my keys. I stared at the phone, waiting for more, for something, anything that sounded like love. Nothing came. David's parents, Linda and Paul, were already on their way from Tacoma, an hour's drive. They'd dropped everything the moment we called, their voices thick with grief over the phone. "We're coming, Natalie. Hold on." But my parents, Susan and Robert, 60, stayed silent. No call back, no text, no sign they understood the magnitude of what I just told them. I sat in that sterile hospital room, David's arm around me, and felt a new kind of pain, a loneliness that wasn't just about losing Lily, but about realizing my family might not care enough to show up. The next few days were a blur of paperwork and decisions no parent should face. Choosing a tiny white casket, picking flowers, planning a service. It was surreal, like I was floating outside myself. David's parents took over practical tasks, calling the funeral home, arranging food for after the service. My parents called once, 2 days later, to ask when the funeral would be. "Friday at 11 a.m., I told Mom, my voice hollow. "Greenview Cemetery." There was a pause, then, "Oh dear. That's the day of Ethan's pool party." Ethan, my 32-year-old brother, the golden child, was celebrating his engagement to Chloe. I thought I'd misheard her. "Mom, this is Lily's funeral. Your granddaughter's funeral." Her voice was calm, almost irritated. "I understand, Natalie, but we've already committed to Ethan's party. All the arrangements are made. You understand, don't you?" I didn't understand. Couldn't. My daughter was dead, And my mother was talking about a pool party like it was a sacred obligation. I felt something crack inside me, a fault line that had been there my whole life, now splitting wide open. "No, Mom," I said, my voice shaking. "I don't understand. Please explain it to me." She sighed, a sound I'd heard 1,000 times when I was being difficult. "Natalie, I know you're upset, but think rationally. Just a baby. Ethan's party matters more. You can always have another." Those words hit like a physical blow, stealing my breath. Just a baby. My Lily, my heart reduced to nothing. I couldn't speak. I hung up, the phone slipping from my hand. David found me on our bedroom floor, staring at nothing, the weight of her words crushing me. I told him what she'd said, and his face darkened with a rage I'd never seen. "They can't be serious," he said, his voice low. "They are," I replied. "They absolutely are." In that moment, I saw my parents clearly, not as flawed but loving, but as people who'd chosen Ethan over me my entire life, and now over my daughter. The pain was so deep it felt like it would swallow me whole. But beneath it, a spark of resolve flickered. They'd dismissed Lily's life, her death, my grief. I wouldn't let them dismiss her memory. I stood there, phone still warm in my hand, my mother's words echoing in my head. "It's just a baby. Ethan's party matters more." I wanted to scream, to call her back and demand she take it back, but I was too raw, too broken. David paced the room, his fists clenched, wanting to call them himself, to tell them what kind of people they were. I stopped him. "It won't change anything," I said, my voice flat. "It's always been this way. I just never wanted to admit it." The days leading to the funeral were a fog of grief and logistics. I barely slept, barely ate, moving through our house like a ghost. David's parents were our lifeline, handling calls, bringing food, sitting with us in our silence. My parents didn't reach out again. No texts, no voicemails, nothing to show they grasped the devastation we were living. I kept hoping they'd change their minds, that they'd call to say they were coming, that Lily mattered. But the silence from Portland was deafening, a confirmation of their priorities. The morning of the funeral, I called Mom one last time, a desperate part of me clinging to the idea that she'd come through. "Are you coming?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Natalie," she said, her tone clipped. "We've been over this. Ethan's engagement party is a big deal. We can't cancel now. Everyone's expecting us." I felt like I'd been slapped. "This is your granddaughter's funeral," I said, my voice rising. "Does that mean nothing to you?" She sighed again, that exasperated sound I knew too well. "You're being dramatic. Lily was only here a few months. Ethan's engagement is about his future. You'll have other children." I couldn't breathe. The callousness of her words, the ease with which she dismissed my daughter's life, was a knife twisting in my chest. "You're choosing a party over Lily," I said, my voice shaking with rage and pain. "You're choosing Ethan like you always have." "Now, Natalie," she said, as if I were a child throwing a tantrum, "don't make this about you. We've put so much into this party. It's not just a party. It's a celebration of family." Family. The word felt like a mockery. "What about my family?" Yes. "What about Lily? What about me?" There was a pause, and I thought maybe she'd hear me. But then she said, "You'll get through this. You're strong. Let us know how the funeral goes." I hung up, my hands trembling, tears burning my eyes. David was beside me, his face pale. What did she say? I couldn't repeat it at first, the words too heavy, too cruel. When I finally told him, he shook his head, his voice low. "They don't deserve you, Natalie. They never have." I nodded, but inside I was reeling. My parents had drawn a line, and I was on the wrong side of it, again. That conversation wasn't just a rejection of Lily's funeral. It was a rejection of my pain, my worth, my entire existence. Growing up, I'd accepted their favoritism toward Ethan, swallowed their neglect like a bitter pill. But this was different. This was my daughter, my heart, and they'd reduced her to an inconvenience. I felt a shift inside me, a hardening of something soft and hopeful. I'd spent my life trying to earn their love, but in that moment, I saw they'd never give it. Not to me, not to Lily. The spark of resolve from earlier grew into a flame. I didn't know how yet, but I knew I'd make them face this. Not with vengeance, but with truth. A truth they couldn't ignore or dismiss. Lily's life mattered. Her death mattered. And I'd make sure they understood the cost of their choice, not just for me, but for the granddaughter they'd never truly known. Friday morning dawned cruelly bright, the kind of clear summer day that mocked the darkness in my heart. I stood in front of my closet, staring at the black dress I'd bought the day before, trying to comprehend that I was choosing an outfit for my daughter's funeral. Lily's service was at 11 a.m. at Greenview Cemetery, in the Garden of Angels, a quiet section reserved for infants and children. As David and I drove there, I checked my phone one last time, hoping for a message from my parents, a sign they'd changed their minds. There was nothing, just a text from Ethan. "Sorry about the baby. Hope the funeral's okay. Pumped for the party." I turned off my phone, the words searing into me. At the cemetery, Lily's tiny white casket stood adorned with pink roses, so small it looked like it belonged to a doll. David gripped my hand, his knuckles white, his face pale with grief. Linda and Paul stood beside us, their eyes red, their presence a steady anchor. Around us gathered friends, colleagues from the hospital, even families of patients I'd cared for. My childhood friend Tessa had flown in from Denver. My college roommate Grace drove up from Olympia. Their support was a lifeline, but the absence of my parents and Ethan was a void everyone felt. I saw the glances, the whispers. "Where's her family?" Linda deflected questions with Grace, but the truth hung heavy. They weren't here because they'd chosen a party instead. Pastor Michael spoke about Lily's brief life, how her 6 months brought love and joy to everyone she touched. "Some souls," he said, "complete their purpose quickly, leaving us forever changed." I wanted to believe that, but all I felt was loss, a hole where my daughter should be. When it came time to lower the casket, my knees buckled. David caught me, his own tears falling silently. Watching that tiny box descend into the earth made her death real in a way nothing else had. She was gone forever. I'd never hold her again, never see her grow, never know who she'd become. As we threw handfuls of dirt onto the casket, my phone vibrated in my purse. I ignored it, but later during a quiet moment I checked. Instagram notifications. Ethan had posted from his pool party 3 miles away, time-stamped during Lily's service. There was my mom, Susan, smiling with a champagne flute, my dad, Robert, laughing with Ethan's friends. They were celebrating while I buried my daughter. The images burned into my mind, a betrayal so sharp it felt physical. I showed David, and his face hardened. "They don't even know what they've done," he said. But I knew. I felt it in every fiber of my being. That day, standing by Lily's grave, I realized their choice wasn't just a mistake. It was a statement. They'd chosen Ethan's joy over my pain, his future over Lily's memory. Growing up, I'd accepted their favoritism, but this was unforgivable. It wasn't just about a missed funeral. It was about a lifetime of dismissal, culminating in the ultimate act of indifference. I'd always been second to Ethan, but Lily deserved better. She deserved grandparents who'd mourn her, who'd honor her life. The pain of that day didn't end at the cemetery. Back home, I walked into Lily's nursery, untouched, her crib still holding the faint scent of her. I sat in the rocking chair, clutching her stuffed bunny, and wept for the future we'd lost. But amid the grief, a clarity emerged. I couldn't change what they'd done, but I could make them see it. Not with anger, but with the weight of truth. I'd hold them accountable, not for revenge, but for Lily, for her memory, for her worth. That resolve became my lifeline, a promise to my daughter that her life would never be just a baby to me, and I'd make sure they couldn't forget it. 2 weeks after Lily's funeral, I found myself driving to my parents' house in Portland for their Sunday dinner, a ritual I'd avoided since her death. David warned me against it, his voice tight with worry. "They don't deserve your energy, Natalie," he said, his hand gripping mine. But I needed to go. I needed to look them in the eyes, to see if they felt even a flicker of remorse for choosing my brother's pool party over my daughter's burial. My grief was a raw, jagged thing, but beneath it burned a need for truth, a need to know if they could face what they'd done. The drive felt endless, the familiar streets of my childhood now alien, like they belonged to someone else's life. My parents' colonial house loomed at the end of the cul-de-sac, its pristine exterior a mask for the dysfunction within. I parked, clutching the steering wheel, my heart pounding. I almost turned back, but the thought of Lily, her tiny casket, her absence, pushed me forward. I couldn't let them pretend it hadn't happened. I couldn't let them erase her. Inside, the house smelled of roast beef, Ethan's favorite, a detail that stung more than it should have. My mother, Susan, greeted me with a brittle smile, her pearls gleaming under the chandelier. "Natalie, you made it," she said, her voice light, as if I'd just stopped by for coffee. My father, Robert, nodded from his armchair in the living room, his eyes on a golf game flickering on the TV. Ethan, 32, lounged on the couch with his fiancée, Chloe, their heads bent over a stack of wedding magazines. The normalcy of it all, the laughter, the clink of wine glasses, was surreal, like stepping into a play where no one acknowledged the tragedy that had just unfolded. We sat at the dining table, the same one where I'd spent countless childhood dinners listening to Ethan's stories while my own went unheard. Mom served the roast, chatting about Ethan's upcoming wedding, the venue they'd booked, the guest list. Dad chimed in about Ethan's new client at work, his voice warm with pride. Chloe gushed about her dress, and Ethan grinned, basking in the attention. Not one word about Lily. Not one mention of the granddaughter they'd failed to mourn. I sat there, my fork untouched, feeling like a stranger in my own family. The silence about Lily wasn't new. I'd grown up with their silence about me, but it was heavier now, unbearable. My hands shook as I set down my glass, the clink louder than I intended. Everyone looked at me, their smiles faltering. "So," I said, my voice low but steady, "did Lily's funeral ruin your pool party?" The words hung in the air, sharp and unyielding. Mom's smile froze, her fork pausing mid-air. Dad's brows furrowed, his mouth tightening. Ethan rolled his eyes, leaning back in his chair. Chloe looked down, suddenly fascinated by her plate. "Let's not bring up unpleasant topics," Mom said, her voice tight, as if I'd mentioned a minor inconvenience. Unpleasant. My daughter's death was unpleasant to her. Something to sweep under the rug. Unpleasant, I repeated, my voice rising despite myself. My daughter's funeral was unpleasant. The one you skipped for Ethan's party. Dad cleared his throat, his go-to move when things got tense. "Natalie, what's done is done. Let's move on." Ethan scoffed, his voice dripping with impatience. "You're so dramatic, Nat. It was one day. Get over it. Get over it." My daughter's death, my grief, reduced to a tantrum he wanted me to snap out of. I felt something snap inside me. Not the grief, but the restraint I'd held onto my whole life, the part of me that always made excuses for them. "One day," I said, my voice trembling with rage. "That was the day I buried my daughter. Alone. While you were all sipping champagne." The room went silent, the kind of silence that presses against your skin. Mom's face paled, her hand clutching her napkin. Dad stared at his plate, avoiding my eyes. Ethan opened his mouth, then closed it, for once at a loss for words. Chloe shifted uncomfortably, her eyes darting between us. I'd broken their script, The one where we pretended everything was fine, where I played the quiet, accommodating daughter. I wasn't that daughter anymore. Lily's death had changed me, and I was done pretending. I reached into my bag, my hands steady now, fueled by a resolve I hadn't known I possessed. I pulled out a small photo of Lily, taken just a week before she died, her green eyes sparkling, her dark curls framing her smile. I placed it on the table, right next to the roast, where no one could ignore it. "This is Lily," I said, my voice low but clear. "Your granddaughter. The one you called just a baby. The one whose funeral you skipped to drink champagne." Mom's eyes flicked to the photo, then away, her lips pressing into a thin line. Dad shifted in his seat, his discomfort palpable. Ethan leaned forward, his jaw tight. "Come on, Nat," he said. "Don't do this. Not here." "Why not?" Shut back. "You all seem fine pretending she never existed." "I'm not." I pulled out my phone, my fingers moving with purpose. I opened Ethan's Instagram, scrolling to the posts from the day of Lily's funeral. I held up the screen, the images glaring in the soft dining room light. Mom with a champagne flute, smiling. Dad laughing with Ethan's friends. Ethan and Chloe posing by the pool, their faces bright with celebration. "These were posted during Lily's funeral," I said, my voice cutting through the silence. 3 miles away, I was lowering my daughter's casket into the ground. "You were laughing. You were celebrating." Mom's hand flew to her mouth, but she didn't speak. Dad's face reddened, his eyes fixed on the table. Ethan snatched the phone from my hand, his face twisting. "This is unfair," he said. "You're cherry-picking moments to make us look bad." "Unfair," I repeated, my voice rising. "You posted these while I buried my child. You think that's fair?" I pulled a folder from my bag, a timeline I'd spent sleepless nights compiling, a record of their favoritism from childhood to now. I slid it across the table, the pages rustling in the quiet. "This isn't just about the funeral," I said. "It's about a lifetime of choosing Ethan over me. My forgotten birthdays, my skipped graduations, my student loans while you paid for his condo. And now Lily's funeral, dismissed for a party." Mom's voice was barely a whisper. "We told family we missed it for health reasons. Your father's back was acting up." "Lie." I stared at her, incredulous. "You lied to protect yourselves. You weren't sick. You were drinking, dancing, celebrating." Dad finally spoke, his voice gruff. "Everyone has favorites, Natalie. You're blowing this out of proportion." "Favorites?" The word landed like a slap, confirming what I'd always known but hoped wasn't true. I pointed to Lily's photo, my voice shaking but firm. "She wasn't your favorite. She wasn't even worth your time. You didn't come to her funeral because Ethan's party was more important. You didn't even call to check on me." Ethan tossed the phone back to me, his voice sharp. "You're making this about you as usual." It was one day, the day my world ended, reduced to a scheduling conflict. I stood, my chair scraping against the floor. "It wasn't one day," I said. "It was Lily's life, my life. And you chose to ignore both." I gathered the photo, the folder, my phone, my hands steady despite the storm inside me. They'd seen the truth now, they couldn't unsee it. But whether they'd face it was another question, one I wasn't ready to answer. I stood there, staring at my family, their faces a mix of shock, guilt, and defiance. Mom reached for Lily's photo, her hand trembling, her eyes finally meeting mine. "She had your eyes," she said, her voice breaking. "I never really looked." Those words should have softened me, but they didn't. "Too late," I said, my voice cold. "You had 6 months to look. You had her funeral to show up. You chose not to." Dad's face hardened, his voice low. "Everyone has favorites, Natalie. That's just life." The admission was stark, unapologetic, and it cut deeper than I expected. I'd always known Ethan was their priority, but hearing it, raw and unfiltered, was a wound I hadn't prepared for. Ethan leaned back, arms crossed. His silence a kind of agreement. Chloe looked away, her discomfort palpable. The room felt smaller, the air thick with the weight of their choices. I pulled a letter from my bag, one I'd written in the sleepless nights after the funeral. My words poured onto the page like blood. I unfolded it, my voice steady as I read. When Lily died, you didn't just miss her funeral. You dismissed her existence, my grief, my worth. You called her just a baby, as if her life didn't matter. You chose a party over her memory, over me. I'm stepping back until you can own this pain, until you understand what you've lost. The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Mom's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't speak. Dad stared at the table, his hands clenched. Ethan shifted, his jaw tight, but he said nothing. I'd expected anger, excuses, maybe even apologies, but their silence was louder than any response. It was the silence of people confronted with a truth they couldn't deny, but weren't ready to face. I tucked the letter back into my bag, my hands no longer shaking. I'm done pretending, I said. I'm done being the daughter who accepts scraps. Lily deserved better. I deserve better. I walked to the door, my heart pounding but lighter, like I'd shed a weight I'd carried my whole life. As I stepped outside, the cool Portland air hit my face, and I felt something new. Freedom. Not from the grief, not from the pain, but from the need to please them, to earn their love. That moment wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. I'd held a mirror to their choices, and they'd seen themselves clearly, maybe for the first time. Whether they'd change, I didn't know. But I changed. Lily's memory had given me the strength to demand what I'd always deserved: respect, acknowledgement, love. I drove away, her photo tucked against my heart, knowing I'd honored her in a way they never would. After confronting my parents, I felt unmoored, like I'd cut ties to a past I'd never fully escape. Lily's death left a void that seemed to swallow everything: my joy, my purpose, my sense of self. But in that darkness, I began to search for light, not to erase the pain, but to live with it. David and I started grief counseling with Dr. Karen Mitchell, a therapist who specialized in infant loss. Her office was a quiet haven, a place where I could name my grief without shame. She helped me see I'd been the scapegoat to Ethan's golden child my whole life, a role that shaped how I saw myself. Naming that truth was like shedding a heavy coat I'd worn too long. I joined a support group for parents who'd lost children, a circle of strangers bound by the worst kind of pain. Their stories, of stillbirths, accidents, SIDS, echoed mine, and in their tears I found solace. We shared photos, memories, ways we kept our children close. One woman told me she planted a tree for her son. Another wrote letters to her daughter. I shared Lily's story, her 6 months of light, and for the first time, I felt her memory held by others. That group became my lifeline, a reminder I wasn't alone. Volunteering with First Candle, a SIDS support organization, gave my grief a purpose. I answered helplines, sent resources to grieving parents, and spoke at awareness events. Each call, each conversation was a way to honor Lily, to keep her name alive. I created a garden in our backyard, a small patch of roses and lilies, where I'd sit and whisper to her. That garden became my sanctuary, a place where I could feel her presence, where grief and love intertwined. Healing wasn't linear, it was messy, full of days I could barely get out of bed. But slowly I found moments of peace. David and I leaned into each other, our love a quiet strength. We'd talk about Lily, her giggle, her curls, keeping her memory vibrant. Dr. Mitchell taught me that grief doesn't shrink. You grow around it. I was growing, not to forget Lily, but to carry her with me, a light that would never dim. 3 months after the confrontation, I declined Ethan's engagement party invite, texting, "Still grieving." Mom called, her voice sharp. Natalie, you need to move on. It's been months. I hung up, her words a sting but no surprise. I'd set a boundary, and she pushed against it, as I'd expected. But then, unexpectedly, my parents reached out. Dad sent a letter, his handwriting shaky. We were wrong, unforgivably so. I don't expect forgiveness, but I'm sorry for missing Lily's funeral, for everything. It was raw, unguarded, the first time he'd admitted fault. Mom mailed a crystal ornament etched with Lily's name, a note tucked inside. I regret not being there. I failed you. Ethan, to my shock, visited our garden, planting a rose bush. I should have been at her funeral, he said, his voice low. I'm sorry. Those gestures didn't erase the pain. They didn't undo a lifetime of favoritism or the choice to skip Lily's funeral. But they were cracks in their denial, signs they'd felt the weight of my truth. I agreed to monthly dinners with rules. No dismissing Lily, no excusing their absence. Some nights they'd slip, praising Ethan's wedding plans or dodging my questions about their regrets. I'd correct them calmly but firmly, and they'd pause, recalibrate. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress, a slow shift toward accountability. I realized healing wasn't just about me, it was about redefining family. I didn't need their approval anymore, but I wanted a relationship where Lily's memory was honored. David and I started talking about another child, not to replace Lily, but to grow our love, to give her a sibling who'd know her story. That hope felt fragile but real, a step toward a future where joy could coexist with grief. Looking back, confronting my parents wasn't about making them regret, it was about making them see. See Lily's worth, my worth, the pain they'd caused. Their apologies, tentative as they were, showed I'd broken through, not with anger, but with the unyielding truth of a mother's love. Lily's garden blooms now. Her roses a testament to a life that mattered. I tend it daily, whispering her name, knowing she's with me, guiding me to live fully, to love fiercely, and to never let her light be forgotten. Lily's 6 months on this earth taught me a love deeper than I ever imagined, a love that reshaped my soul. Her death, sudden and cruel, taught me strength I didn't know I had. Losing her to SIDS was a wound that will never fully heal, a scar I carry with every breath. But standing up to my parents, confronting their choice to skip her funeral for Ethan's pool party, was my way of honoring her. It wasn't about revenge. It was about truth, about ensuring Lily's life, however brief, was never dismissed as just a baby. That confrontation broke the chains of a lifetime spent chasing their approval, freeing me to live for myself, for David, for Lily's memory. Healing has been a jagged path, full of tears and quiet victories. I've learned grief doesn't fade. You grow around it, weaving it into who you are. Lily's garden, blooming with roses, is my testament to her light, a place where I feel her still. My parents' tentative apologies, their slow steps toward accountability, don't erase the past, but they show I made them see. I'm not the invisible daughter anymore. I'm Natalie, a mother who fought for her child's worth, who found resilience in unimaginable loss. Lily's love lives in me, guiding me to a life where pain and hope coexist. If you've faced loss or betrayal, know this: your pain is real and you're not alone. Your story matters, just as Lily's does. Share it in the comments. How have you healed or struggled through grief or family wounds? Your words could be a lifeline for someone drowning in silence. If this story touched you, please hit that like button, subscribe, and share it to reach others who need to hear it. Let's build a community where no one grieves unseen. Support organizations like First Candle, helping families navigate the devastation of infant loss. Their work saves lives and holds parents close when hope feels out of reach. I visit Lily's garden every day, tending her roses, whispering her name. It's my sanctuary, a reminder that love endures beyond loss. I've learned to find joy in small things: David's laughter, a sunrise, the promise of a future where Lily's memory shines. If you're hurting, seek your own sanctuary, whether it's a garden, a journal, or a trusted friend. You deserve to heal, to feel whole again. This journey has taught me that strength isn't loud. It's the quiet resolve to keep going, to honor those we've lost by living fully. Lily's light guides me still, and I hope this story lights a path for you. Thank you for listening. Let's keep her memory and your stories alive.